6. Important signs that you are healing without realizing it. You are not broken, but some part of you is not sure about that anymore. You have done the work. You have felt things you spent years avoiding. You have sat with silence that used to terrify you. You have walked away from people and patterns that were slowly erasing you. And still, on most mornings, you wake up, and the first thing you feel is not peace. It is a quiet, heavy question you cannot quite silence. Why does healing feel so much like falling apart? That question is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is proof that something real is happening inside you. Here is what nobody tells you. Healing does not feel like healing while it is happening. It does not arrive with clarity. It does not come with a morning where everything suddenly makes sense. Most of the time, healing looks like confusion. It looks like crying about something that happened 3 years ago as if it just happened yesterday. It looks like being more sensitive, not less. It looks like outgrowing people you once needed and not being able to explain why. It looks, from the inside, almost exactly like getting worse. And because it looks that way, most people stop trusting the process entirely. They look for signs of progress in the wrong places. They expect to feel stronger, more certain, more detached. They expect healing to make them harder. So when they feel softer, more emotional, more aware of their pain than ever before, they conclude the opposite of the truth. They tell themselves, I am not healing. I am just broken in a new way. But that conclusion is one of the most dangerous lies a healing person can believe. What if everything you have been reading as failure is actually your most precise evidence of transformation? What if the grief is not regression, but your body finally feeling safe enough to release what it carried for years in silence? What if the sensitivity is not weakness, but a nervous system slowly coming back to life after a long, necessary shutdown? What if the restlessness you feel is not you falling apart, but the old version of you finally losing its grip? You did not find this video by accident. Something in you already suspects the answer to the question you have been afraid to ask out loud. And by the time this video ends, that suspicion will become something far more solid. Not hope, certainty, the kind that does not need anyone else's confirmation to exist. But before we get there, we need to start with the sign that almost everyone misreads completely, the one that feels the most like failure, and is, in truth, the most powerful sign of all. There is a particular moment that most people who are healing will recognize. It happens on an ordinary afternoon, watching something small, a film, a stranger's face, a song you have heard 100 times before, and suddenly you feel it land in your chest in a way it never did before, not louder, deeper. And your first instinct is to wonder what is wrong with you, because you remember a time when you did not feel this much, when emotions moved through you quickly, or did not seem to move through you at all, when you could hear difficult news and stay composed, navigate conflict without your whole nervous system lighting up. You were functional, you were stable, you were, by most external measures, fine. What you did not know then is that you were not fine. You were frozen. Most people who have lived through sustained stress, emotional pain, or trauma develop this without choosing to. The mind and body, in their extraordinary intelligence, begin to suppress emotional experience as a survival mechanism. Not to harm you, to protect you. When the feelings are too big, too dangerous, or too destabilizing for the circumstances you are in, the system does the only thing it can. It turns the volume down. And it works. For a while it works remarkably well. You become someone who handles things, someone who does not fall apart, someone who can carry weight that would break others and keep moving. People around you may even admire this quality in you, calling it strength, calling it resilience, calling it maturity. What they are actually witnessing is a nervous system that learned to survive by going numb. The problem is that numbing is not selective. You cannot turn down the volume on pain without also turning it down on joy, on connection, on wonder, on love. The same wall that keeps the unbearable out also keeps the beautiful at a distance. You stop feeling the bad things as acutely, yes, but you also stop feeling fully alive. And then healing begins. Slowly, the way ice melts, the wall begins to thin. The nervous system, finally in a context of enough safety, begins to thaw. Everything starts to feel more again. Not just the soft things, all of it. The grief that was waiting. The anger that was never allowed. The longing buried under years of staying busy, staying strong, staying fine. This is the moment most people panic. Because feeling more does not feel like healing. It feels like regression. It feels like you were doing better before and now something has broken open that you cannot close again. You cry more easily. You get affected by things that used to slide off you. You feel things in your body that you used to feel only in your head. A heaviness in the chest, a tightness in the throat, a sudden wave of something unnamed and overwhelming. And because our culture has taught us that emotional control is the goal, that composure equals health, you interpret all of this as evidence that you are getting worse. But here is the truth that changes everything. Feeling more is not falling apart. It is coming back together. The emotions you are experiencing now were always there, waiting in the body, stored in the places you never looked. What is new is your capacity to feel them without being destroyed by them. What is new is that somewhere inside you, something has become safe enough to finally let them surface. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary courage, even when it does not feel like it. The depth you feel now, the way music hits differently, the way certain words reach somewhere inside you that used to be untouchable, the way you cry not always from sadness but from something closer to recognition. That depth is the fingerprint of a soul that is no longer protecting itself from its own experience. You are not too sensitive. You are finally sensitive enough, and that sensitivity, as uncomfortable and disorienting as it feels right now, will allow you to experience life in a way the numb version of you never could. It will make your relationships deeper, your creativity richer, your presence more real. It is not a symptom to be managed. It is a capacity being restored. But feeling more deeply is only the beginning, because as the emotional wall thins, you begin to look back at who you were, at the choices you made, and something in you no longer recognizes that person. Not with judgment, with distance. And that distance is the next sign that something profound is shifting inside you. There is a strange grief that nobody prepares you for on the healing journey. It is not the grief of losing someone else. It is the grief of losing the version of yourself you spent years becoming. The one who learned to shrink in certain rooms. The one who laughed off pain to keep others comfortable. The one who said yes when they meant no. Who stayed when they should have left. Who apologized for existing too loudly in spaces that were simply too small for who they truly were. You do not miss that person exactly, but their absence leaves a particular kind of silence. Most people assume that growth feels good, that when you evolve, when you shed old patterns and step into a more authentic version of yourself, there will be a clear sense of relief, of arrival, of finally being free. And sometimes there is. But more often, in the early and middle stages of healing, growth feels deeply uncomfortable. Not because something is going wrong, because something is going right in a way your nervous system has no previous reference for. Here is what is actually happening beneath that discomfort. When you begin to heal, your perception changes before your circumstances do. You start to see clearly what you previously could not afford to see. The relationships built on your smallness, the habits inherited from pain, the beliefs about your worth installed so early and so quietly that you mistook them for truth. And as that clarity grows, the old version of you, the one who operated from those beliefs, begins to feel foreign. Old conversations feel hollow. Old environments feel suffocating. Old ways of connecting feel like clothes that no longer fit your body. You put them on and something in you recoils, not with hatred, with a quiet, unmistakable knowing that you are no longer that person, that you cannot go back, even if part of you wants to, because the awareness you now carry cannot be unseen. And that is where the discomfort lives, because the old self, as limited as it was familiar. It knew the rules. It knew how to survive. It had systems and strategies and ways of moving through the world that, however painful, were predictable. The new self, the one emerging through healing, does not yet have all of those systems in place. It is learning. It is uncertain. It is reaching for a way of being that is more honest, more boundaried, more true. but that also feels in many moments terrifyingly uncharted. So the discomfort you feel when you look back at who you were is not shame. It is contrast. It is the natural result of having expanded beyond a previous version of yourself. Just as someone who has traveled cannot pretend the world is only as large as their hometown, someone who has genuinely healed cannot pretend they still hold the same beliefs, tolerances, and self-perceptions they once did. The discomfort is the distance between where you were and where you now stand. And the greater that discomfort, the greater the distance you have traveled. As you change, the people around you may not. And this creates a specific kind of loneliness that is very difficult to articulate. You sit in conversations that once felt normal and now feel shallow. You witness behavior in others that you recognize because you once did the same thing, and something in you feels a complicated mixture of compassion and distance. You are not better than them. You are simply different than you were. But that difference, when not yet fully formed, not yet confident, not yet integrated, can feel like alienation. You wonder if healing is supposed to make you feel more connected or less. You wonder if the distance from your old life is growth or loss. You wonder if you are becoming someone better or simply someone lonelier. The answer is that you are becoming someone real. And real people, people who have stopped performing and started becoming, will always feel a temporary distance from the world built around their performance. That distance is not permanent. It is the space between who you were and who you are becoming. It is uncomfortable because it is honest. And it is honest because for perhaps the first time you are no longer willing to pretend. The version of you that once kept the peace at the cost of your own truth served a purpose. It kept you safe in environments where safety required silence. Honor it for what it did, but do not mourn its passing as though you have lost something precious. What you have lost is a cage. What is emerging in its place, still uncertain, still tender, still finding its footing, is something far more valuable. It is you, unedited, unperformed, and finally, slowly, free. There is an exhaustion that comes from a very specific habit, not the exhaustion of physical work or emotional labor in the traditional sense. It is the exhaustion of constantly building a case for your own existence, of justifying your choices to people who did not ask with genuine curiosity, but with the quiet weight of judgment, of explaining why you need what you need, why you feel what you feel, why you are making the decision that, in the deepest part of you, you already know is right. If you have spent most of your life doing this, you may not even notice you are doing it anymore. It has become as automatic as breathing. Someone raises an eyebrow, and your mouth is already forming the explanation. Someone expresses mild disapproval, and your entire inner world reorganizes itself around earning back their comfort. Someone questions your choice, and before they have even finished the sentence, you are already dismantling your own position to make room for theirs. This is not politeness. This is a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. At some point, likely very early, you learned that your needs, your feelings, and your choices were subject to approval. That love and safety were things that could be withdrawn if you did not perform the right explanations, the right justifications, the right level of smallness. And so you became extraordinarily skilled at preempting judgment, at softening your truth before it could be rejected, at translating who you are into whatever language the people around you were willing to hear. The problem is that constant self-justification is a form of self-betrayal. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has not earned that explanation, you are implicitly agreeing with the premise that you require their approval to be valid. You are handing over the authority of your own inner world to someone else's comfort. And over time, that erosion is quiet but devastating. And then something shifts. It does not happen dramatically. You do not wake up one morning and decide that you no longer care what people think. It is subtler than that. It begins with a pause. Someone questions your decision, and instead of the familiar rush of anxiety, the immediate impulse to explain and justify and reassure, there is a moment of stillness, a quiet inner voice that says, I do not actually owe this person an explanation, and for the first time you listen to it. At first, that silence feels dangerous. Your nervous system, trained for years to equate silence with conflict and conflict with abandonment, will sound every alarm it has. You will feel the urge to fill the space, to smooth things over, to reassure. But if you can sit with the discomfort long enough, something remarkable happens. Nothing collapses. The relationship does not end. The world does not fall apart. And you begin to realize that the catastrophe you were always bracing for was never as inevitable as you believed. This is the quiet birth of self-trust, not the loud, performative confidence that declares itself in every room. The deep, unhurried knowing that your choices, your needs, and your truth do not require anyone else's endorsement to be real. That you can hold a position without defending it. That you can make a decision without building a legal case for it. That you can simply be who you are, without the constant labor of translation. You will notice this showing up in small ways at first. You stop over-explaining your choices at dinner. You cancel plans without writing a 3-paragraph apology. You set a boundary, and when someone pushes back, you repeat it calmly instead of immediately negotiating it away. You share something true about yourself, and when it is not received the way you hoped, you do not immediately retract it. These are not small things. They are enormous. Because every time you choose your own truth over someone else's comfort, you are rewriting a very old story. You are telling your nervous system something it has needed to hear for a very long time. Your existence does not require justification. Your needs do not require defense. You are allowed to take up space simply because you are here. Think back to the last time you were truly alone. Not alone in a room while scrolling through your phone. Not alone in the technical sense while keeping half your mind occupied with noise, with tasks, with the constant low hum of distraction. Truly alone, present with yourself. No input, no output, just you and the silence of your own inner world. For many people, that image is not peaceful. It is unsettling. There is a particular kind of person who cannot be alone with themselves. Not because they are shallow or incapable, but because somewhere along the way, their own inner world became a place that was not safe to inhabit. The silence was too loud. The thoughts were too heavy. The feelings that surfaced without distraction were too unfamiliar, too uncomfortable, too much. And so they filled every available space with noise, with people, with busyness, with the endless, exhausting project of never quite being still. You may recognize yourself in that description, or you may recognize a past version of yourself, because one of the quietest and most profound signs of healing is the gradual shift in your relationship with your own company. It begins almost imperceptibly. You notice that you are not reaching for your phone quite as automatically as you used to. You notice that sitting in silence for a few minutes does not immediately produce anxiety. You notice that being alone on a Saturday afternoon, which once felt like evidence of failure, like proof that you were not wanted or not interesting enough, now sometimes feels like something closer to relief. This shift is not about becoming antisocial. It is not about withdrawing from relationships or losing interest in connection. It is about something far more fundamental. It is about becoming someone whose own presence is no longer threatening to themselves. Here is what the fear of solitude is really about. When we cannot be alone, it is rarely because we love company so much. It is because in silence, the parts of ourselves we have been avoiding become impossible to ignore. The unprocessed grief, the unasked questions, the longing that has no obvious object, the anger that was never allowed, the deeper truths about our lives that we have been too busy, too distracted, or too frightened to face. Solitude is not empty. It is full of everything we have been carrying without acknowledging. And for someone who has spent years managing that weight by staying in motion, the prospect of stopping, of sitting down in the middle of all of it, is genuinely terrifying. But healing changes the interior landscape. As the most overwhelming emotional material begins to be processed, as the nervous system begins to regulate, as the relationship with your own inner world becomes less adversarial and more curious, the silence starts to change quality. It becomes less like a room full of threats and more like a room you are slowly learning to furnish. You begin to find in the quietest moments something you may have been searching for in every relationship, every achievement, every distraction, a sense of your own presence, a feeling of being at home in yourself. And that feeling, however fleeting at first, is revolutionary, because a person who can be alone with themselves is a person who is no longer entirely dependent on external circumstances for their sense of okayness. They can sit with uncertainty without immediately needing to resolve it. They can feel difficult emotions without immediately needing to escape them. They can exist in the spaces between stimulation without feeling like they are disappearing. This does not mean the solitude is always comfortable. Healing does not make silence uniformly peaceful. There will still be hard days when being alone means being alone with thoughts and feelings that are sharp and heavy, but the difference is that now you can sit with them. You no longer need to flee. You have developed, slowly and without always realizing it, the capacity to be present with your own experience without being destroyed by it. And in that capacity lives a kind of freedom that no relationship, no achievement, and no amount of noise can provide. There are things that happen to you that you decided at some point were not that bad. Maybe because someone told you they were not. Maybe because the people around you had experienced worse and your pain felt disproportionate by comparison. Maybe because acknowledging how bad it actually was would have required a response you did not yet have the resources to make. So you filed it away under a quieter category. You called it life. You called it just how things were. You called it something you had moved past, even before you had ever truly moved through it. And for a while, that filing system held. But healing has a way of reopening drawers you thought were sealed. One of the most disorienting and frequently misunderstood signs of genuine healing is the emergence of grief for things that happened long ago. Things you thought you had dealt with. Things you thought you were over. Things that, by external measures, should no longer have the power to affect you. And yet here they are, surfacing with a freshness and an emotional weight that seems entirely disproportionate to how much time has passed. You may find yourself crying about your childhood in a way you never did when you were actually living it. You may suddenly feel the full weight of a relationship that ended years ago, not because you want it back, but because you are finally allowing yourself to feel the loss you bypassed at the time. You may recognize, perhaps for the first time, that certain things you experienced were not normal, were not acceptable, were not the standard against which all pain should be measured. And with that recognition comes a grief that is both necessary and overwhelming. This is not regression. This is integration. Your system, in its wisdom, was protecting you from emotional material that you did not yet have the capacity to fully process. It was not denial in the pejorative sense. It was a form of pacing, a way of ensuring that the most destabilizing truths arrived only when you were strong enough to receive them. The fact that this grief is surfacing now is not evidence that you are falling apart. It is evidence that you are finally strong enough to hold what you could not hold before. There is a profound difference between the grief of the unhealed and the grief of the healing. The grief of the unhealed tends to be diffuse, unnamed, expressed sideways. It shows up as chronic low-level sadness that has no specific object, as irritability that seems disproportionate to its trigger, as a vague sense of emptiness that nothing ever quite fills. It is grief that has no language because the person carrying it has never been able to look directly at its source. The grief of the healing is different. It is specific. It has a name, a face, a memory attached to it. It is the grief of someone who can now look directly at what happened and say, "That hurt me. That was wrong. That loss was real. That version of me deserved better." It is harder in the short term because it is more honest. But it is the only kind of grief that actually moves, the only kind that processes rather than accumulates. And when grief moves, something extraordinary happens in its wake. The places in you that were holding that unprocessed pain begin to release. Not all at once, not completely. But gradually, the body that was storing what the mind could not yet face begins to soften. The emotional weight that you had learned to carry so naturally that you forgot you were carrying it begins, piece by piece, to lighten. This is why people who are genuinely healing often cry more than people who are not. Not because they are weaker, because they are finally allowing the movement of something that was long overdue. Every tear is not a breakdown. It is a release. It is the body's intelligent way of completing an emotional cycle that was interrupted years ago by circumstances that required you to stay functional instead of feeling fully. Grieve what you normalized. Grieve it with your whole heart. Grieve the childhood moments that deserved more tenderness. Grieve the relationships that required you to be less than you were. Grieve the years you spent believing things about yourself that were never true. Grieve the version of you that survived all of it without ever being told that what they carried was not their fault. That grief is not weakness. It is the most honest and courageous thing a healing person can do. Everyone has them. The conversation that sends your heart rate soaring before you understand why. The tone of voice that instantly transports you somewhere you do not want to go. The situation that on paper should be manageable, but lands on you with a weight that feels ancient and outsized and entirely beyond the current moment. The thing that makes you react in ways that surprise even you, that leave you wondering afterward, why did that affect me so much? We call these triggers, and for most of the healing journey, they feel like the enemy. They are the proof we tell ourselves that we are not healed, that we are still broken in the old places, that no matter how much work we do, these raw nerves remain, ready to be struck by any passing resemblance to the original wound. They are humiliating in their predictability, they are exhausting in their persistence, and they have a particular talent for appearing at the worst possible moments, in the most public settings, with the least possible warning. But here's what your triggers actually are. Underneath the shame and the frustration and the exhaustion of being repeatedly ambushed by your own nervous system, they are a map. Every trigger points, with extraordinary precision, to an unhealed wound. Not randomly, not chaotically, but with the kind of specificity that, once you learn to read it, becomes one of the most useful navigational tools you have ever been given. The trigger does not fire in response to what is happening now. It fires in response to what this moment resembles, what it echoes, what old story it activates in the body before the conscious mind has time to assess the actual present moment. This is not a flaw in your design. It is a feature of a nervous system that learned to survive by pattern matching, by scanning the environment for anything that resembled past danger and responding to that resemblance before the threat could fully materialize. At some point in your history, that rapid response system kept you safe. It was accurate then. It is misfiring now. But the misfiring is not evidence of permanent damage. It is evidence of an old program running in a new context that it was never designed for. The shift that marks healing is not the disappearance of triggers. It is the change in your relationship with them. Early in the healing journey, the trigger is everything. It is all-consuming, immediate, and total. There is no space between the stimulus and the reaction. The wound is struck and the response is instantaneous, flooding, complete. You are not having an emotional reaction. You are being the emotional reaction. But something begins to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a gap begins to open. Not because you are suppressing the response, not because you are white-knuckling your way through it, but because the nervous system is beginning to build a new capacity, the capacity to feel the activation and remain present with it rather than being swept away by it. 1 second of space becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, and in that space, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Choice. You begin to notice the trigger as it arises, rather than only after it has already detonated. You begin to feel the old story beginning to run and recognize it as a story, as a pattern, as something that belongs to the past even as it echoes in the present. You begin to ask, even in the middle of the activation, the question that changes everything. What is this actually about? And when you ask that question honestly, the trigger begins to reveal its cargo. The rage that surfaces when someone dismisses your perspective is not just about this conversation. It is about every conversation in which your reality was denied, your experience minimized, your truth treated as an inconvenience. The anxiety that floods you when someone does not respond quickly to your message is not just about this silence. It is about all the silences that preceded it, the ones that meant something was wrong, that love was being withheld, that you had somehow failed to maintain the connection you needed to feel safe. When you can see this, everything shifts. The trigger is no longer a humiliation. It is information. It is your inner world, with extraordinary accuracy, showing you exactly where the healing is still needed, exactly which wounds have not yet been fully tended, exactly which old beliefs are still running beneath the surface of your conscious choices. This is what it means for your triggers to become your teachers. Not that they stop hurting, not that the activation becomes comfortable, but that you develop the ability to sit at the edge of the wound and look into it rather than running from it, to use the discomfort as a doorway rather than a wall. And every time you do that, every time you pause and ask the deeper question instead of acting from the raw reaction, you are showing your nervous system that the old danger has passed, that the present moment can be met differently than the past demanded, that you are no longer the person who had no choice but to react. You are becoming someone who, slowly and with great practice, is learning to respond. Insight is easy. Change is not. You can spend years understanding exactly why you do the things you do. You can trace every pattern back to its origin, name every wound with clinical precision, articulate the mechanics of your own self-sabotage with extraordinary clarity, and still find yourself, in the moment of choice, doing the familiar thing. The thing that does not serve you. The thing you swore you would stop doing. The thing that, even as you are doing it, a part of you watches with a kind of exhausted recognition. This is one of the most demoralizing experiences of the healing journey. The gap between knowing and doing. The distance between understanding your patterns and actually changing them. And it leads many people to conclude that healing is not working. That insight without behavior change is evidence of being fundamentally stuck, fundamentally unable to be different from what they have always been. But this conclusion misunderstands how change actually works. Behavioral change, real change, the kind that persists and deepens rather than collapsing under pressure, does not happen at the level of decision. It happens at the level of the nervous system, at the level of the body, at the level of the deep, pre-verbal programming that governs what feels safe and what feels dangerous, what feels like home, and what feels like threat. And that level of change is slower than insight. It requires not just knowing, but experiencing, repeatedly and over time, that a different choice is possible without catastrophic consequence. This is why behavioral change, when it genuinely begins to happen, is one of the most powerful signs of healing available. Because when you start choosing differently, you are not just making a different decision. You are demonstrating that something in your nervous system has shifted enough to allow a different action, even in the presence of the old fear. Even when every conditioned response in your body is pulling toward the familiar. Even when the new choice feels uncertain, uncomfortable, and unguaranteed. You notice it in the small moments first. You choose to say no to something that would have cost you enormously, knowing the other person will be disappointed, and you stay with the discomfort of that disapproval, rather than immediately reversing the decision. You choose to leave a conversation that is becoming harmful rather than staying and absorbing the damage out of a sense of obligation. You choose to rest when your old pattern would have pushed through, to ask for help when your old pattern would have struggled alone, to tell the truth when your old pattern would have offered a comfortable version of it designed to avoid conflict. These moments do not feel heroic. They rarely do. They feel small and uncertain and sometimes lonely, but they are carrying something enormous inside them. Every time you make the new choice, you are giving your nervous system new data. You are showing the deepest parts of your programming that the world does not end when you honor your own needs, that relationships do not inevitably collapse when you hold a boundary, that you do not lose yourself when you stop managing everyone else's emotional experience, that the catastrophe you were always bracing for when you chose yourself is, more often than not, a fear rather than a fact. And the nervous system, remarkably, learns from this, slowly, with repetition, but it learns. Each new choice that does not result in catastrophe makes the next new choice slightly more available. The gap between the trigger and the response grows incrementally wider. The old pull toward familiar patterns does not disappear, but its grip loosens. And gradually, almost without your noticing, the new choice begins to feel less like an act of will and more like an expression of who you are becoming. Choosing differently is an act of profound self-respect. Every time you make a choice that honors your own well-being over a conditioned pattern, you are communicating something to the deepest part of yourself. You are saying, I am worth choosing. My needs are worth honoring. My truth is worth the discomfort of living it. And that message, repeated in action rather than just in affirmation, begins to build something that no amount of self-help content can create directly. It builds genuine self-worth, not the kind that is performed or declared, the kind that is demonstrated to yourself by your own behavior, the kind that does not require external validation because it is rooted in evidence, the evidence of your own choices. There is someone. There may be more than one. A person who hurt you in a way that left a mark that has not fully faded. Someone who took something from you, your trust, your sense of safety, your belief in your own worth, and who has never fully acknowledged what they did. Who has never looked you in the eye and said the words that some part of you has been waiting to hear for months, or years, or perhaps your entire life. I am sorry. I was wrong. What I did to you mattered. You deserved better. The waiting for those words is one of the most human things there is. It comes from the most legitimate place imaginable. When someone wounds us, our psyche registers an account that feels unbalanced. Something was taken. Something was broken, and the most natural response in the world is to want the person who created the wound to participate in its repair, to acknowledge the damage, to offer the validation that would finally close the loop and allow us to move forward with a sense of justice, rather than an open question. There is nothing wrong with wanting that. It is a completely reasonable desire. The problem is, what happens when you make your healing conditional on receiving it? Because here is the truth that no one wants to hear. Some apologies will never come. Some people do not have the self-awareness to understand the harm they caused. Some have the awareness but lack the courage to acknowledge it. Some are so defended against their own guilt that any admission of wrongdoing would require them to dismantle a self-image they cannot afford to lose. And some simply do not believe they owe you anything, and nothing you do or say or wait for will change that. And if your healing requires their participation, then your healing is in their hands, not yours. This is the subtle but devastating trap of waiting for the apology. It feels like the moral high ground, like the reasonable position, like simply wanting what is fair. But functionally, it hands the person who hurt you a second form of control over your life. First, they wounded you. Now, by withholding the acknowledgement you need, they determine whether you can move forward. They may not even know they are holding this power, but you are giving it to them every day you wait. The shift that marks a profound stage of healing is the moment when you decide to reclaim that power. Not by pretending the harm did not happen, not by performing forgiveness you do not feel, not by minimizing what was done or excusing what was inexcusable, but by making a different decision about what your healing requires, by deciding that your capacity to move forward will not be determined by someone else's willingness to show up. This decision is not about them. It is entirely about you. Justice and healing are related but separate things. Justice is about what they owe you. Healing is about what you owe yourself. And what you owe yourself is not dependent on what they choose to give. You can pursue accountability where it is possible. You can be honest about what happened and what it cost you. You can hold the truth of the harm without minimizing it. And you can also, at the same time, choose to release your healing from the condition of their acknowledgement. That release is not forgiveness in the way the word is often weaponized, the kind demanded prematurely that is used to silence legitimate pain, that is dressed up as spiritual advancement but is actually just another form of suppression. It is something quieter and more personal. It is the decision to stop carrying the weight of their unfinished business as though it were your own, to take back the energy you have been spending on waiting, on hoping, on rehearsing conversations that have never happened, on keeping the wound open because closing it without their participation would feel like letting them win. Letting go is not letting them win. It is letting yourself live. The apology you deserved may never come, but the life you deserve does not require it. And the moment you truly know that, not just intellectually but in the body, in the gut, in the place where the waiting lived, something that has been held for a very long time begins to release. The body keeps the score. You may have heard this phrase before. It has become something of a cultural touchstone in conversations about trauma and healing, and for good reason. because it points to something that most of us spend years learning the hard way. The mind can intellectualize, rationalize, and narrativize its way through almost anything. But the body does not lie. Everything you have ever experienced lives somewhere in the physical structure of you, not as a memory in the conventional sense, not as a story you can choose to tell or not tell, but as a pattern, a habitual tension in the shoulders that appears whenever conflict is near, a tightening of the throat when something important needs to be said, a chronic low-level hypervigilance that keeps the muscles slightly braced, the breath slightly shallow, the nervous system slightly elevated, even on days when there is no logical reason for alarm. These patterns are not character flaws. They are not signs of weakness or oversensitivity. They are the body's faithful record of everything it navigated and survived. They are the physical architecture of an intelligent system that learned to keep you safe in circumstances that required a very particular kind of alertness. But healing changes the body. Slowly, undramatically, and in ways that are easy to miss if you are not looking for them. You may notice that you are sleeping differently, not necessarily better in every measurable sense, but differently. The quality of sleep is shifting. The way you wake up is shifting. The dreams are shifting, becoming more vivid sometimes, more emotionally charged, as the nervous system uses the safety of sleep to process material it could not approach during waking hours. You may notice that your breathing has changed, that there are moments, unexpected moments, where you take a breath that is deeper than usual and something in the chest releases around it. The kind of breath that feels less like an intake of air and more like a small act of surrender, like the body remembering for a moment that it does not have to brace. You may notice that you are more aware of your body as a place of sensation rather than a machine you operate, that you catch yourself noticing the feeling of warmth, of physical comfort, of the ground beneath your feet, in a way that the hypervigilant version of you never had bandwidth for, that your relationship with the body is moving, slowly, from something adversarial or dissociated toward something more present and more inhabitable. You may also notice stored tension as it begins to release, surfacing as unexpected emotion. A wave of sadness that seems to come from the body rather than the mind. A shaking or trembling that arises during rest. A sudden flood of feeling that appears to have no cognitive trigger, no story attached to it, just a raw physical movement of something held for a very long time. This is not breakdown. This is completion. The body, like the psyche, has cycles of emotional experience that, when interrupted, do not disappear. They wait. They accumulate. They manifest as the chronic tension, the shallow breath, the perpetual low-level unease that so many people carry without ever identifying its origin. And when the conditions are finally safe enough, when the nervous system finally has enough resource and enough support, it begins to complete those interrupted cycles. This completion is messy. It is not linear. It does not follow the timeline your mind would prefer. But it is one of the most concrete and undeniable signs that healing is happening at the deepest level available, the level of the body itself, the level that no amount of intellectual understanding can bypass or replace. Pay attention to your body, not with judgment or analysis, but with curiosity and respect. It has been doing extraordinary work for a very long time. And the changes you are beginning to notice in how it holds itself, how it breathes, how it sleeps, how it responds to the world, are among the most honest indicators available that something fundamental is shifting. Tell me if any of this sounds familiar. You experienced something that disturbed you, and when you tried to describe it, you were told you were overreacting. You felt something clearly, and were informed that what you felt was incorrect. You noticed a pattern in someone's behavior, and were made to feel that the noticing was the problem rather than the pattern. You trusted your instincts about a situation and were persuaded, with enough persistence and enough subtle pressure, to override them, until eventually, after enough of these encounters, something quiet and foundational began to erode. Your trust in your own perception. This erosion is one of the most insidious effects of certain relational dynamics, and one of the most difficult to detect precisely because it targets the very instrument you would normally use to detect it. If you learn to distrust your own perception, You lose access to the primary tool through which you would identify that your perception is being undermined. It is a closed loop of self-doubt that can persist for years after the original circumstances have changed, long after the people or environments that created it are no longer present. It shows up as a chronic need to check your experience against others, an inability to hold a position firmly without immediately second-guessing it when challenged. A default assumption that when there is a conflict between your perception and someone else's, theirs is probably more accurate. A habit of beginning sentences with qualifiers. Maybe I am wrong, I could be mistaken, I might be imagining things, but if you have spent time in relationships, families, or environments where your reality was consistently denied, this is not a personality trait. It is a learned response. It is what happens when a person's natural trust in their own inner knowing is repeatedly and systematically undermined. But here is what is remarkable about perception and trust. They can be rebuilt. Not all at once, not without difficulty, but they can be rebuilt through the same mechanism by which they were damaged, through accumulated experience. Except that this time, the experience is different. Instead of being repeatedly shown that your perception is wrong, you begin to accumulate evidence that it was right. You recall a time when you felt something was off and dismissed it, only to have events confirm that your instinct was accurate. You remember a situation where you overrode your own knowing to accommodate someone else's version of reality, and trace the cost of that override. You begin to notice in smaller present-day situations that your initial read of a dynamic, a person, a situation, has a quality of accuracy that you have been trained to distrust. And slowly, with great care and with great attention, you begin to listen to that knowing again. This is one of the most quietly radical signs of healing because it requires no external validation. In fact, it is specifically characterized by a decreasing need for external validation. You know what you know, not with arrogance, not with the closed certainty of someone who has stopped being curious, but with the quiet, grounded confidence of someone who has learned that their inner world has information that deserves to be taken seriously. You begin to say things like, I noticed something felt off and I decided to pay attention to that. Or, I know what I experienced, even if it is not acknowledged by someone else. Or simply, and most powerfully, I trust myself. The return of self-trust is not a loud event. It arrives in moments, in small decisions to honor what you sense before seeking permission from someone else's reality, in the gradual, cumulative experience of your own perception being confirmed, by events, by outcomes, by the body's responses, as fundamentally trustworthy. There is a particular pattern that shows up frequently in people who are in the early stages of healing. It is a relational oscillation between two extremes that feel, from the inside, like the only two options available. Either you are completely open, completely giving, completely absorbed in the emotional world of another person to the point of losing your own center entirely, or you are closed, guarded, emotionally unavailable, protected behind a wall that keeps others at a distance that feels safe but also isolating. Most people who are healing cycle between these two positions without quite understanding why, and the cycling itself becomes a source of shame. I am too much. I am not enough. I cannot connect without drowning. I cannot protect myself without disappearing. But these two extremes are not personality traits. They are the nervous system's limited options in the absence of a regulated center, when you do not have a stable enough relationship with your own inner world. When your sense of self is still porous and conditional, connection with others becomes inherently destabilizing. Either you merge, losing your boundaries in the warmth of closeness, or you distance, protecting your fragile sense of self from the perceived threat of being overwhelmed. What healing begins to build is a third option, something that sits between merging and distancing, something that allows genuine presence without dissolution, the ability to be with someone else's pain without becoming it, to care deeply without losing the thread back to yourself, to be fully in the room with another person's experience while remaining fully in your own body. This is what it means to hold space, and the ability to do it, genuinely and sustainably, is one of the clearest signs of inner stability that the healing journey produces. You notice it in conversations that would previously have left you flooded or flat. Someone shares something difficult with you, and instead of immediately absorbing their distress or shutting down to protect yourself, you find something quieter, a steadiness, an ability to be present with what they are experiencing without needing to fix it, escape it, or carry it home with you afterward. You can hear hard things without being destabilized by them. You can sit with someone in their pain without either drowning alongside them or abandoning them to protect yourself. This is not coldness, it is the opposite of coldness. It is warmth with roots. There is something important to distinguish here. Holding space is not the same as caretaking, and it is not the same as emotional labor in the exploitative sense. The old pattern, the one that many healing people are moving away from, was one in which the well-being of others was managed at the expense of your own, where presence meant sacrifice, where caring meant losing yourself. What emerges through healing is fundamentally different. It is a form of presence that is available because you are not depleted by it, because you are giving from a place that is being replenished rather than a place that was already empty, because your care for others is no longer driven by the fear of what happens if you do not care enough, but by a genuine, freely given desire to be present for the people who matter to you. You will notice this change in how you feel after difficult conversations. The ones that used to leave you drained for days now leave you tired in a normal human way, but not devastated. You can have hard conversations and return to yourself afterward. You can engage with someone else's emotional world and find, when the conversation ends, that your own world is still there waiting for you, intact, grounded, your own. They do not last long. That is the first thing to know about them. They are not the sustained, uninterrupted peace of someone who has resolved every inner conflict and arrived at a permanent state of equanimity. They are something more modest and, in some ways, more remarkable. They are moments, minutes sometimes, a single breath, a pause in the usual interior noise during which something settles, something quiets, and you find yourself present in the simplest sense of the word, not thinking about the past, not rehearsing the future, not managing an emotion or analyzing a pattern or working through a wound. Just here, just now, just this. For someone who has been living inside a hyperactive nervous system for years, these moments are extraordinary. The mind that has been shaped by chronic stress, anxiety, or unprocessed trauma learns to be perpetually occupied. There is always something to worry about, something to anticipate, something to review. The inner world becomes a place of constant activity, of monitoring and planning and bracing and managing. And this activity, exhausting as it is, serves a purpose. It keeps the system alert. It maintains the vigilance that survival required. It is the mind's way of staying ready for a threat that in the present context may no longer be coming. When moments of unexpected peace begin to appear, they are a sign that the nervous system is starting to update its threat assessment. Not fully, not permanently. But in these brief windows, the vigilance lowers, the monitoring pauses. The body allows itself to be present in safety, to inhabit the current moment without scanning it for danger, to rest in the simple experience of being alive without needing that experience to be anything other than what it is. These moments often arrive in specific conditions: the stillness of early morning before the day's demands arrive, the particular quality of afternoon light, a piece of music that bypasses the analytical mind entirely, a walk in nature, a conversation that ends with a sense of genuine connection, the feeling of physical warmth, the company of an animal. Small things, ordinary things, things that the healing nervous system can finally receive without immediately filtering them through the lens of what might go wrong. Do not dismiss these moments. Do not wait for them to become longer or more frequent before you acknowledge their significance. Do not tell yourself that they do not count because they are too brief, too inconsistent, too easily disrupted by the return of familiar anxiety or sadness or restlessness. They count. They count enormously, because each one of these moments is evidence of something the loudest parts of your inner world have been drowning out. They are evidence that beneath the noise, beneath the history, beneath the accumulated weight of everything you have navigated, there is a quality of presence in you that is uninjured, a capacity for peace that the pain never managed to eliminate, only to obscure. These moments are the first glimpses of what becomes, over time, more accessible. They are not the destination. They are the preview. The nervous system's way of showing you what it is capable of when the conditions are right, and what becomes possible as the healing deepens and the conditions begin to feel right more often. Notice them. Not with grasping, not with the desperate wish to hold on to them before they fade, but with quiet recognition. The recognition that what you just felt, however briefly, was real, that it belongs to you, that it will return, and that each time it does, it will stay a little longer. At some point you learned that certain emotions were not safe to show. Vulnerability, uncertainty, fear, grief, the admission that you were struggling or lost or unsure of yourself. You learned, probably very early and from very reliable teachers, that these states were liabilities, that they invited judgment or withdrawal or the kind of concern that feels more like burden than support, that the world responded better to you when you appeared to have it together, when you projected competence and composure, when you gave others the version of you that did not require anything from them. And so you became very good at performing strength. Not real strength. Real strength is something different entirely. Real strength is the capacity to feel the full weight of something difficult and remain present with it. It is the ability to be honest about struggle while continuing to move through it. It is the courage to be seen in the in-between places, the places that are not resolved, not triumphant, not yet okay, and to remain there without collapsing or pretending it does not exist. The performance of strength is something else. It is the mask worn over the places that hurt, the practiced composure, the reflexive fine that appears before anyone has even finished asking how you are, the ability to carry enormous weight and make it look like nothing, to suffer privately and thoroughly while projecting something seamless and manageable to the world. For a long time, this performance was a survival strategy. In environments where vulnerability had been met with dismissal, exploitation, or punishment, learning to appear strong was the only way to protect what was already fragile. It made sense then. It was intelligent then. But strategies outlive their context, and what protected you in one chapter of your life can imprison you in another. Because the performance of strength requires an enormous, continuous expenditure of energy. Energy that is not available for actual healing. Energy that is not available for genuine connection. You cannot simultaneously perform being okay and allow yourself to actually feel what is there. The performance requires the suppression. They are mutually exclusive. And one of the most profound signs of healing is the moment the performance becomes too exhausting to maintain. Not because something breaks catastrophically, but because you have developed enough of an internal foundation, enough genuine self-worth, to begin to risk being seen as you actually are. This looks different for different people. For some, it begins in therapy, in the protected container of a space designed for honesty. For others, it begins in a conversation with a trusted person where something true slips out before the performance can catch it. For others, it begins alone, in private, in the simple act of admitting to themselves that they are not fine, that this is hard, that they need something. Whatever form it takes, the loosening of the performance is seismic. Because every time you let someone see the real thing, every time you admit to struggling without immediately qualifying it into palatability, every time you ask for help without dressing the request in 5 layers of justification, you are doing something that rewrites the oldest story. The story that says your worth is conditional on your composure. The story that says love is available only for the version of you that does not need anything. The story that says if people see the full reality of you, they will leave. Some will. And that is important information about where they are, not where you are. But the ones who do not leave, the ones who respond to your honesty with their own, who meet your vulnerability not with judgment but with recognition, those relationships become something that the performed versions could never have been. They become real, and the experience of being genuinely seen and genuinely met in your reality is one of the most profoundly healing experiences available to a human being. You do not have to have it all together. You never had to. And the quiet, revolutionary act of finally accepting that is not a sign that you have stopped being strong. It is the sign that you have finally discovered what real strength actually is. For a long time, the past was not the past. It was now. It lived in the body as vigilance, in the mind as rumination, in relationships as the shadow of old patterns projected forward onto new people in new situations. It shaped what you expected, what you feared, what you allowed yourself to want. The past, for someone who has not yet been able to integrate it, does not stay behind. It comes with you everywhere. You recognize this in specific ways. You meet someone new and within moments your nervous system is running calculations that have nothing to do with who they actually are. It is comparing them to templates drawn from much older experience. It is anticipating betrayals that have not yet happened based on betrayals that happened years ago. It is bracing, even before there is any reason to brace, because bracing has become the default orientation toward intimacy. Or you find yourself in a situation that objectively does not call for fear, and yet the fear is there, specific and physical and entirely certain of itself, because the situation resembles something that once was dangerous, not in the present, in the past. But the nervous system does not file things under past and present the way a calendar does. It files them under safe and unsafe. And once something is filed under unsafe, every resemblance to it triggers the same response. This is how the past owns the present, not through conscious memory, through the body's filing system. But healing changes the filing system, not by deleting the files. The memories do not disappear. The experiences do not stop having happened. But something shifts in the relationship between the memory and the present moment. The memory becomes, gradually, a record rather than a recurring event, something that happened and is acknowledged in its full reality. But that is no longer running the current moment from behind the scenes. You begin to notice this in your capacity to be present in a way that was previously unavailable to you. Conversations that would have activated old patterns now simply land as conversations. People who resemble in some superficial way, people who hurt you in the past are able to be experienced as themselves, as new people, rather than as proxies for old wounds. Situations that once triggered a full-body historical echo now pass through you more cleanly, touching the present without dragging the entire past behind them. This is not indifference. You have not become someone who has no history. You have become someone whose history is no longer the primary lens through which every present moment is filtered. There is a difference, and it is profound, between knowing your past and being run by it. The grip loosens, not all at once, not in every area simultaneously. The past tends to release in layers and domains in specific relational contexts one at a time. You may notice it first in one area of your life and still feel its pull strongly in another. That is normal. That is how integration actually works. And as the grip loosens, something becomes available that is both very simple and very significant. The ability to be here, to be in this conversation, this moment, this relationship, this day, without the constant interference of somewhere else, some other time, some older fear. To experience the present, not as a rerun of the past, but as what it actually is, new. That newness is one of the most quietly beautiful signs that healing has gone deep, not to the surface, not to the level of behavior, but to the level where the past was stored, to the body, to the nervous system, to the place where the real work of transformation has been happening all along. There is a particular moment that many people on the healing journey reach. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, usually in the middle of an ordinary day, in the space between one thing and the next. And in that space, something registers that has never registered quite this way before. You are not the same person you were, not as a statement of loss, not as a source of confusion or grief, but as a simple, almost neutral recognition. The person who began this journey, the one who was surviving rather than living, performing rather than being, bracing rather than resting, is not who is standing here now. Something has changed. Not everything, not all at once, but something real and substantial and irreversible. And for perhaps the first time, instead of asking whether you have changed enough, instead of measuring the distance between where you are and some imagined destination of total wholeness. You simply notice the distance between where you are and where you were. That distance is the evidence. Everything in this video, every sign we have explored together, the depth of feeling returning, the discomfort with who you used to be, the quieting of the need for validation, the new relationship with solitude, the grief that is finally moving, the triggers that are becoming maps, the different choices being made, the release of waiting for the apology, the body beginning to soften, the trust in your own perception returning, the ability to be present for others without losing yourself, the unexpected moments of peace, the performance of strength beginning to fall away, the past loosening its grip on the present. All of it is pointing to the same thing. You are becoming someone who could not have existed without every single thing you have been through. This is the paradox at the heart of healing that is almost impossible to see from inside the wound. The wound is not incidental to who you are becoming. It is part of the material. The sensitivity you are developing came from having been hurt and choosing, however slowly and imperfectly, to feel it rather than bury it. The self-trust you are rebuilding came from having had it taken and deciding it was worth recovering. The capacity for genuine presence you are developing came from years of understanding, from the inside, what absence costs. You could not have arrived here without the journey, and the journey, every chapter of it, including the ones you are not proud of, including the years that felt wasted and the choices you wish you had made differently, and the time you spent in patterns that did not serve you. All of it was part of what brought you here. Not despite the difficulty. Because of it. This is not a romanticization of suffering. Suffering is not noble in itself. It does not automatically produce wisdom or growth. What produces growth is the choice, made repeatedly and imperfectly in the middle of the suffering, to remain curious about it, to keep asking what this is trying to teach, rather than only asking when it will end, to keep moving, even slowly, even uncertainly, in the direction of becoming more honest, more present, more genuinely yourself. That is the choice you have been making, maybe without recognizing it, maybe without any certainty that it was working, but you have been making it. This video is evidence of that. The fact that you are here looking for signs of your own healing, searching for language to describe an inner process you can feel but cannot yet fully articulate, that is not a sign of being lost. It is one of the most precise signs of all that something in you is oriented toward its own wholeness. Healing is not the restoration of who you were before the pain. It was never that. The person you were before the pain did not yet have access to the depth, the compassion, the hard-won wisdom, the exquisitely calibrated sensitivity that you are carrying now. Healing is not a return. It is an emergence, something that could not have existed without the full weight of everything that came before it. But that is not defined by that weight. Something that carries the history without being imprisoned by it. Something that is, in the truest sense, new. You are not who you were, and that is not a loss. That is the entire point. The person you are becoming, the one who feels things deeply and chooses consciously and grieves honestly, and trusts themselves and can be present without performing, and can sit in silence without terror, and can hold others without losing themselves, and can face the past without being owned by it. That person is not some future ideal to be achieved. That person is already emerging, has already been emerging. Through every hard conversation and every different choice and every unexpected moment of peace and every tear that finally fell, and every apology you stopped waiting for. You are already becoming. You have been becoming all along. And the very fact that you noticed, the very fact that you looked for these signs, the very fact that some part of you recognized itself in what was described here today, is the most important sign of all. You are healing. Not perfectly, not completely. Not in a way that will ever be entirely finished, because the deepest kind of growth does not end, it only deepens. But you are healing. Genuinely, undeniably, and more than you have been giving yourself credit for. Trust the process. Trust the pace. Trust the person you are slowly, courageously becoming.